patients who've been resuscitated from cardiac arrest and them sort of enumerating exactly what transpired in the room, even while they were in a state of cardiac arrest and being revived. Some patients have come back and said that they were actually able to visually see what was going on with their body, that, doctors were, and nurses and other health professionals were actually resuscitating them, doing chest compressions, and they were not able to feel anything, but they were actually able to see everything.
So at the beginning of the episode, we talked a little bit about, your background in the space and all of the different intersections you have in terms of interventional cardiology, having your own podcast, which I never even mentioned, Parallax, being interested in this idea of interaction between spirituality and medicine. We hopped into this idea of what does sickness look like for your clients, and then what does fitness look like in terms of how do we start to measure that. We touched on this idea of getting a calcium scan and doing that as early as possible because plaque builds up and then it never goes away. And the only thing we have right now is an option to know where we're at and then make sure that it doesn't get worse over time. It's like the inverse of financial health, right? Is start early, start often, and build up. This is the exact opposite. Start early, start often, but don't build up, right? So I want to take a moment now and shift a little bit of gears, because one of the unique aspects of your work that I find so intriguing is this intersection, this interplay of spirituality and medicine. And I think so much of our world is spending time trying to separate those two things. Like, this is your body, this is how it works. These are the things that are happening inside on a cellular level, and it's biology, and that's it. And that's very different than spirituality, which is over here. And yet I find, and it sounds like some of the things that you share, there's so much interconnection between our body, our mind state, how those are interplaying, and what are we seeing as the purpose of our life and where we see it going. So I'd love for you to touch just a moment, if you will, on why you feel the intersection of spirituality and medicine is vital for us as humans.
Yes, I think... first off, I truly believe that we are more than just our bodies. There's consciousness, and then there's consciousness which is sort of packaged into this physical body or this physical form that you and I see. What do I mean by that? I mean, there is now, fairly cutting edge. This is scientific work. This came out of NYU, and they studied patients, and they studied hospitalized patients who had near-death experiences. So getting revived from cardiac arrest with return of spontaneous circulation, and then they went on to interview these patients as to what they were experiencing. Sometimes they also interviewed patients who were comatose in an ICU on a ventilator for a long time, not interacting with their physical body or not interacting with their physical personality that their family members were aware of, and still remembering conversations which occurred in the room despite them being on a ventilator and in a state of coma. Patients who've been resuscitated from cardiac arrest and them sort of enumerating exactly what transpired in the room, even while they were in a state of cardiac arrest and being revived. Some patients have come back and said that they were actually able to visually see what was going on with their body, that, doctors were, and nurses and other health professionals were actually resuscitating them, doing chest compressions, and they were not able to feel anything, but they were actually able to see everything. So the idea that we are a lot more than just our physical bodies is not voodoo, is not a concept, is not a religious belief. It has been shown by both physics, so metaphysics, or particle physics, and now science. I mean, these are studies in humans. These are studies in patients. So, I think it is, for me as a physician, I think it's a bedrock to address your spiritual needs or someone's spiritual needs. What do I mean by that? Is, what are your beliefs on life and death? What are your beliefs when it comes to goals of care? What are your beliefs when it comes to, partaking in, or us, sort of executing life-saving measures when you are in a life-threatening situation? Do you want chest compressions? Do you want to be intubated? Do you want to be on a ventilator despite no documented function? Do you want to have a tracheotomy? We certainly deal with emergent situations and end-of-life situations, in my practice. And so that is crucial for me to sort of bring up and have, honest conversations with patients and also their family members. And then, these are not easy conversations because, in the society we live in, at least in the West, I know people think slightly differently in the East, but at least in the West, we sort of don't really meditate on our death. We don't have, daily thoughts or conversations even with ourselves on, what it is going to look like when I die, or how will I feel when I'm nearing death, or what will my death feel like or look like or behave like, or what will be my life scenario when I'm dying. We all know that we all know that we're all going to die. We all know that we're mortal beings, but we actually never have discussions around it. We sort of want to shove it under the carpet or not bring it up, even with our kids or with our, significant others or with our family members. But I think it's something we should constantly meditate on. We should constantly, not saying in a morbid way, I'm not saying, and not meditate in a morbid fashion or not be depressed about it, but just sort of have this, have a relaxed attitude about it and sort of think about it very objectively and with a lot of mind and thought into it, because I can tell you that so much of what we do in modern medicine, we've made death a process, even though we know it's an eventuality. And I think there's you'll be surprised, at least whenever I have these conversations with patients, I'm surprised how many of our patients do not want to go out, battling in an ICU on a ventilator with pumps and wires dangling out of their bodies. Nobody wants to die in that fashion. People want to die in peace. People want to die with their loved ones being around them. People want to die in their homes. They don't want to die in a hospital bed. And I think the sooner we have these conversations, the better. So I think for me, having a mature sort of spiritual portfolio in your entire life is crucial, because that is going to be the compass which will guide you on, decisions on life and death, decisions on how you want to lead your life, decisions on, I think even your carbon footprint, right? I think about this a lot. I'll be honest with you, I would never think about this. But as much as I've thought about how to live a life, and as much I've become very mindful of the resources that I'm using for my own existence, I've sort of embraced a minimalistic approach toward living a life. Just having a decluttered space, not accumulating too many things. Having just minimal furniture. Minimal sort of equipments and gadgets, and even very minimal clothing too. Not having like a wardrobe like full of like options and clothes. I think I've and I think all these aspects of your existence are an offshoot of how spiritually evolved you are. So for me, how I live, how I work, how I interact with patients, what conversations I'm having with patients, have a deeply spiritual signature of who I am as a spirit, and then sort of trying to meet my patients in the same realm, because we're all, at the end of the day, we're all souls captured in these physical bodies which we can see, And once these physical bodies will cease to exist, our souls will still exist. That is my inherent belief. It is more a spiritual belief than a religious belief, although it just falls directly into the religion which I follow. Mm-hmm. And so I think each time I have sort of gone into that spiritual space and then came back into the space of Western medicine, which is what I've trained in and which is what I practice, I've sort of, I think more as a learning exercise for myself, tried to find a final common pathway where both these coalesce. And, there is a final common pathway, which I truly feel there is. I think there is more in common than different, if you were to ask me. And I think as, in an effort to educate myself and sort of share what I've garnered with readings in theology and medicine, I thought it would be worthwhile to put pen to paper and write these thoughts, which is why I've written, about, spirituality in medicine. I've talked about spirituality in medicine. I've talked about spirituality in cardiovascular health. I've talked about certain yogic practices which foster cardiovascular health. And a further extension to that is, the emotions that I deal with when I'm dealing with families and patients and loved ones and putting those emotions into poetry. So I think this is all sort of in a continuum and exist sort of like a footprint of my own existence. So I don't, if you were to ask me, which you were at the beginning, is like, what have I not done? I think I don't think of it in that fashion. I don't think of it like another checkbox. I just think of it as something which is an offshoot of my own expression, as a human. So it's something which is innate to me, something which is very organic, is not something which I have to work toward or work for or show someone or prove someone. It's not of that nature. It's not another checkbox. It's very organic. It just comes very naturally to me.
I love that. I think I feel very similar in that sentiment. I talk a lot about the difference between our message and our platform. A lot of people get caught up in the idea of their platform, which is usually the titles, or I'm a podcast host, or I'm a lecturer at a university, or I'm a senior executive, yada yada. I get really interested in people's messages. What is it that you're trying to share with the world through your voice or through your work? And then the platform may change for that. I have several platforms that I use as a desire to serve people in optimizing their well-being so that they can create fulfilling lives and do meaningful work. That's my message. And I might do that today with you. I might do that at Purdue University where I teach, but ultimately that's the message. And I think that kind of alludes to what you're sharing, which is this idea of I have a lot of different platforms, but it's all a similar message that I'm trying to share. So while other people may not understand why a poet would also be a TEDxer who would also be an interventional cardiologist, to you, it's just, this is the message I'm trying to share to the world. And I'm fortunate to have all these different platforms to do it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's just, I think you said it perfectly. It's just a different platform. It's just a different platform which sort of is facilitating me to share my message more than anything else.
Yeah, that's great. And unlike most humans in the Western cultures, I'm going to not avoid the topic of death. And I want to circle back to it a little bit because I think it's such a vital conversation to have. I have a poster it's called 4,000 Weeks. It's a visual representation of all the weeks I have on Earth, and they're little dots. And every time I have a week, I mark the little dot, and it shows me. I plan on living to 100, so I have there's two versions, one for 80 years and one for 100. I'm an optimist at heart, but that is a visual representation, and I get a lot of questions about it. Some people think it's a little morbid, other people understand the sentiment, but the reason I have that is a very similar reason to why the Greeks would share. A lot of people don't know this, but they believed that the gods were envious of mortals. And the reason is because life is so much more beautiful when you know it's going to end. And the cultures that appreciate that often find themselves a little bit more happy. So a lot of people who study happiness understand Bhutan. The country of Bhutan is one of the happiest, even though it's also one of the poorest, or poorer than a lot of developed countries. And they actually nationally interject the conversation or the topic of death into their daily lives 2 to 3 times a day. They're talking about it and they're thinking about it. They've just integrated death as a part of their normal being, and that's what it is. It's the most natural thing that we do besides live. So just having those conversations allows us the opportunity to find more gratitude in this thing that is life.
Yes. No, this is, I know that Bhutan is one of the happiest countries in the world. And, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's, I think that the Stoic philosophy is also one of the schools of thought which, constantly teaches us to meditate on one's death. And I think it's, as you said, is as natural as life is, and also that I think there is fear around death. I think there's fear because it's sort of associated with a sense of loss. It's associated with emotional pain. It's associated with, I think for the loved ones and for the family members, but I think for someone who's dying, there is that thought that death is going to be painful. And I think there is research now which has shown that actually near-death experiences were not painful. Near-death experiences were actually very, very peaceful, very calming. There was a sense of, blissfulness and eternal peace. And there was this light, which was very attractive. And, people who were experiencing that were not wanting to come back, into the physical realm. And so I think the more we learn about it, the more we educate ourselves about it, and the more we talk about it to our loved ones as well as to ourselves, I think the less of a process it will become, which it has become. And I think it's a sad statistic, but I think upwards of 70 or 80% or even more healthcare dollars are spent in the last 1 year of life, in the US, which tells you how much of a process it has become for us in the US, and how much of a driver of healthcare cost it has become. And again, I'm not trying to sort of pivot this conversation like health economists do, thinking in terms of economics, but I think it's something to be cognizant of, and it's something to be mindful of, and it's something to talk actively with ourselves and as well as with our family members.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's the other challenging part. Atia talks about this a little bit from Outlive, is the idea that not only is so much money being spent on those final years, it's also the quality of life is extremely marginal because we haven't taken care of ourselves. And while I believe strongly that we should be serving people in our health and our well-being, and healthcare should provide for those things, I also wonder how much of those trillions of dollars going into healthcare, if shifted to an idea of more wellness and well-being and preventative care, could help us not only live longer lives, but happier and more fulfilling lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember listening to a podcast from somebody who was on the plane that solely ended up flying into the Hudson and landing successfully. And they were actually on the plane, and they were recalling all of the things that were going through their head as they were landing. And the person that was interviewing them, and the name escapes me, so I'm guessing a lot of people know this individual by now, but they're asking, were you scared of the pain or the death? And they said there wasn't fear involved in my last moments of what I thought would be my last moments of life. What I felt was a deep sense of sadness and regret that I hadn't lived the life that I truly should have lived. And so most people, I think, when faced with the idea of death, it is an uncomfortable feeling, but maybe not so much the idea of the death itself, but what that death might represent in terms of the potential that it took away from their lives. And so I think that there's another power there in thinking about our death, insofar as it reminds us that we only have so much time on this earth, and we should be spending it doing things like Robert Waldinger suggests in the Happy Life is making connections with other human beings. It's serving for a greater cause. It's just finding fulfillment in the things that we're doing. And I think the idea of thinking of that aspect of finality is important in that.
Yeah, no, could agree with you more. I could not agree with you more.
Yeah. So one of the things I'd ask Ankur as we start to wrap up our conversation, I always try to figure out or get suggestions from my guests about what can we start to do to improve our lives. And so I go in two different directions with this. I go with the thinkers and I go with the doers. For the thinkers who want to learn a little bit more about this subject, what books might you recommend? What resources might you suggest that they look into or read to better understand the kind of the topics that we're talking about today?
Yes, I think for me, my spiritual guide has been the Bhagavad Gita. It's the celestial song, the Lord, the song of the Lord. It can be contextualized as a Hindu text, but I think it's more sort of like a lifestyle guide more than it being a Hindu text. There are many interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita. I think I personally would recommend listening to some of the podcasts from Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's a spiritual teacher. He's based out of New York. So I think following his teachings and then reading the Bhagavad Gita would be something which I would advise. You can find him online, on YouTube, on Spotify. I recommend reading the Bhagavad Gita and then listening to him because, I think you need a teacher for you to understand the text, and contextualize it, because otherwise it can be put out of context and that it would not make sense to you. The other author is Eckhart Tolle, and The Power of Now, I think is a really good book. I think Dan Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, the Harvard psychologist who won the Nobel Prize. I think that's a really good book. It teaches you a lot about how much your subconscious is making the decisions for you and the choices for you than your own conscious mind. It sort of is an eye-opener into how much role the subconscious has to play in your everyday thought process and decision making. And I think it again sort of reinforces the concept of developing or evolving spiritually, because that's where you are feeding your subconscious, and I think if you can sort out your subconscious, then your conscious world will be sorted. So I think that's sort of a path-breaking, sort of life-changing book by Daniel Kahneman. I think those are the books that I would recommend for the listeners to read.
Okay, awesome. Any books pertaining to physical health that you found insightful?
I haven't read as much books which are non-medical but still talk about health, because I read a lot of medical literature, so I don't think I find that space deficient in any way, shape, or form. But if I do come across a book, I certainly can share with you in person.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm guessing most people probably aren't going to dive too far into the medical journals of interventional cardiology and find it helpful for them personally. We'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Kalra, as we wrap up, are there any suggestions for the doers in terms of habits that you might suggest they get into to start to maybe a daily habit or a weekly habit to benefit their heart health or benefit some of these spiritual aspects that we spoke about today?
Yes, I mean, I think if anyone wants to take anything away from this conversation, I think one would be to invest in exercise. I think that would be a big message. 30, 45 minutes a day is enough. I think invest in some way, shape, or form of moving. I think just like sitting on a chair is the new smoking, as I call it. So don't do that. Don't just keep sitting. I think also if you can, as hard as it may be, or as boring or bogus, however you want to call it as it may be, which I can tell you that it's completely not. It's completely the opposite. Is like try and get into a meditative practice. If you can, I don't know, maybe start with 5 minutes, 10 minutes of meditation every day, first thing in the morning. Don't look at your phones. Don't check your emails. Don't look at your social media feeds. Don't look at all the notifications. Just, get up and say a little prayer and, maybe sit, have a glass of water, go to the bathroom. And then if you can sit down and meditate for at least 10 minutes, but what do I mean by that, right? It's just like, either close your eyes or, ideally close your eyes and just, observe your mood, observe your thoughts. Don't fight them, just sit with them. And just keep observing them and don't resist them. I think the problem with meditation is that people want to resist their thoughts, which is like a constant train. It's never going to stop. And that's where the fight is, at least for me. That's where the fight was. Like, okay, it's like, how do I meditate? Like, I'm going to focus on a single word, Om. And then as I'm focusing on Om, I'm having like all these thoughts. I have all these patients to see. I have this paper to finish. I have this deadline to meet. I have to plan for this conference. I mean, a whole host of things. And then you slowly sort of don't focus on that syllable or that monotone of a voice, and just keep watching your thoughts and just keep seeing them pass by. And as you keep doing that, you'll realize that you are slowly becoming thoughtless. And that is sort of getting into the space of meditation. And it sort of gives you a sense of calm. It sort of grounds you incredibly. It gives you a sense of peace. It gives you a sense of direction. It slows you down intentionally a little bit, which I think is important for all of us, as antagonizing as it may sound for an interventional cardiologist, where pace is key. I think it internally slowing you down is crucial, and so I think that is what meditation gives you. It's the gift of the peace and the calm and the stillness, which is crucial to ground yourself and make decisions from a place of equanimity and not from a place of anxiety or from a place of conflict or from a place of trauma. So I think just to end on a spiritual note there. So I think if people can take these messages from this show, I think it'll be a win for you. It'll be a win for me.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I follow the same practices because I know how powerful they are. So
yeah.
Where can people go to learn more about you, to follow the things that you're sharing, to follow in what you're passionate about?
So I have my own website. It's ankurkalra.md. That's where they can find about everything I'm doing outside of being an interventional cardiologist. Whether it's whether it's podcasting or whether it's about my research or whether it's about my nonprofit. I think that's one place where they can find everything about my sort of my interests and what I'm pursuing. or they can follow me on X or Twitter. Again, it's the handle is Ankur Kalra MD. So I think those would be the two places where, if there's interest in sort of following some of the work that I'm doing, then those would be the platforms to follow.
Wonderful. Ankur Kalra, I appreciate so much, not only your time today, but just all the things you're doing to share physical, spiritual, mental health to the rest of the world.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.